So Samsung's Galaxy S23 Ultra and Apple's iPhone 14 Pro Max are arguably two of the best smartphones available here at the start of 2023. Now that I've had enough time to use and compare each of these flagships in my everyday life, I want to take a few minutes to discuss with you some of the key differences and maybe even help you decide which of these phones is right for you. So sit back, subscribe, and let's get started. Starting with price. So for the S23 Ultra, at this point in time, we are beginning to see Samsung run some newer promotions, most notably being higher trade-in values for many of their older generation devices to try and entice people to upgrade, but for the sake of simplicity in this video, we'll stick with its retail price of $1,200, which gets you 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage, and the iPhone 14 Pro Max, many months later, still sells for its retail price of $1,100, which gets you 6GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. So these two phones essentially are the same price, since bumping up the iPhone to a similar storage size leaves our wallets equally empty, setting us up for a perfect pound-for-pound comparison here. Now, a persistent problem that has been plaguing these premium flagship phones lately is the lack of accessories included in the box, with these two being the primary culprits, considering the fact that a charging cable is the only thing we get alongside these phones, leaving earbuds and chargers up to us to find a solution for. Fortunately, I found a solid third-party solution for charging up either of these phones from Anker, who is kindly sponsoring this video to show off their new Ace chargers, which can top up any of your Apple or Samsung devices at the fastest speeds while taking up little to no space at your outlets and on the go. These small but mighty GAN chargers provide charging speeds up to 25 watts and 45 watts respectively, and they are both compatible with Samsung's super fast charging standard, allowing me to charge my S23 Ultra from 0 to 30% in just 10 minutes time, 0 to 50% in 20 minutes, and 0 to 75% in a little over 30 minutes, and my iPhone 14 Pro Max isn't too far behind, getting from 0 to 22%, 41%, and 59% in similar time frames. I've had no issues fitting these into any outlets given their compact size, and the foldable prongs make them perfect for stowing away when on the go. Anker also offers a 5-amp charging cable sold separately to get the maximum 45-watt charging speed out of the Ace 313 charger, and this lengthy cable also folds up nicely with its built-in strap. You can find all of these products on Amazon, so I'll leave some links down in the description and first pinned comment. And thanks again to Anker for easily and effectively keeping my S23 Ultra, iPhone 14 Pro Max, and my many other mobile devices topped up and running. So with the stage set and these phones fully charged, let's start with their screens, since on a spec sheet they may seem very similar with large sizes, hence their names, AMOLED panels, and high refresh rates for smooth and seamless navigation regardless of what you're doing. I found in my real-life long-term usage that these two displays couldn't be any more different than one another. Apple's approach with the iPhone 14 Pro Max's screen feels more simple and streamlined, with an entirely flat display, aesthetically pleasing rounded corners, and a somewhat smaller cutout at the top for your camera and Face ID functionality, which blends in decently with the display given its own rounded nature, and some bits of added functionality to make this cumbersome cutout feel more of like an addition rather than a subtraction to the screen's overall real estate. Whereas Samsung's S23 Ultra feels like the exact opposite of Apple's approach, with an attempt to pack as much screen real estate as possible in front of your attention-seeking eyes, with not only its noticeably smaller cutout at the top, but overall what is a taller, more rectangular canvas, alongside some slightly rounded edges to give you as much screen as possible, and a form factor that doesn't feel too cumbersome in the hand when holding and using it in many different ways on a daily basis. And with feel in the hand in mind, it's worth noting that these display differences attribute directly to the design differences these two phones also have from one another, as the flatter iPhone 14 Pro Max makes for what is a sharper feeling in your hand, especially at your fingertips, and the S23 Ultra's slightly rounded front makes for a similarly rounded backing, which gives a much nicer and smoother feeling in the hand overall, with the only downside being the rectangular corners digging into your palm a bit more, whereas the iPhone only has that smooth feeling advantage on its rounded corners. And the iPhone doesn't help itself out much further design-wise when you factor its noticeably heavier weight, coming in at 252 grams, whereas the S23 Ultra comes in nearly 10% lighter at 232 grams despite having a larger footprint. I understand there is a material difference here that makes for this large discrepancy, with Apple opting for a stainless steel siding and Samsung sticking to aluminum sidings, but the fact remains that these flagship phones continue to get heavier and heavier over over time, and it gets to a point for me personally where I can't help but look at a 252-gram iPhone and compare it to something like a Samsung Galaxy Fold 4, which weighs only 11 grams more while providing way more screen real estate and functionality. Mini rant aside though, and sticking to the task at hand, these two phones actually have just as much in common as they do differences, despite many people having their polarizing opinion on these devices and brands one way or another. The reason for this, I believe, is that only a few years ago, Apple and Samsung's flagship offerings had their distinctive advantages over one another, with Apple being the king of all ecosystems, always bringing best-in-class battery life and camera systems, and of course their quote-unquote superior software, while Samsung led the way and still leads the way in categories like better displays, more versatile hardware and software to get more use out of your individual device rather than having to rely on a whole ecosystem of products for your daily tasks, and having all of this alongside the added freedom of Android, which steers clear of walled gardens and limiting the number of things your phone can do for you. So while Apple has been seemingly coasting along the past few years with their tried and true upgrade cycles and predictable enhancements year over year, with the iPhone 14 Pro Max being little to no exception to this, it's hard for me to shake the feeling that the S23 Ultra is the result of some solid hardware and software refinements along the way that makes this matchup a lot more interesting. With my first point of interest being battery life. While both the iPhone 14 Pro Max and S23 Ultra saw battery improvements over their predecessors, the S23 Ultra improved itself enough to now call battery life a draw between these two phones, which is something I've never been able to do before. Each of these devices get me 2 to 3 days of battery life in light to medium use, and in the heaviest of use cases, I cannot remember a day when either of these phones did not have enough battery to get me through a full day. Flipping around back, we of course have two very impressive camera systems in their own regards, which each have their ongoing preferences of more natural looking results by default on the iPhone, contrary to Samsung's more saturated shots without touching any of the settings. But when you are looking strictly at the average everyday user experience, there is no question in my mind that the S23 Ultra has the clear hardware advantage here, with overall versatility in providing a 10 times optical zoom and 100 times digital zoom, whereas the iPhone, no matter how good its core capabilities are, lack a capable zoom lens, which hurts it heavily in this long-term matchup. A funny but very telling example I have for this video is the squirrel I stumbled upon the other day in the backyard. I was inside the house at the time, and going outside and close up to capture the moment was certainly out of the question, as the squirrel would just run away, and it goes without saying that this relatively low-light task at hand was most certainly a challenge for the iPhone 14 Pro Max here, while admittedly having enough zoom to capture the moment and having record of it at the very least. The S23 Ultra in this scenario knocked it out of the park in comparison, with not only providing a much more clear and crisp result, but also having the ability to zoom in as close as I wanted to alongside some excellent image stabilization while filming a video. I know this is just one example, but it's the perfect representation of how I feel about the extra capabilities of the S23 Ultra camera array over the iPhone 14 Pro Max in my average everyday life use, which will always be more important to me than any spec sheet or megapixel count that is used to promote and sell these phones. Now, with average everyday long-term usage in mind, of course nearly anyone will tell you after 6 months of using the iPhone 14 Pro Max and 2 months of daily use with the S23 Ultra that either of these phones are excellent in everyday use. However, there are a few key points I've realized in my personal use over this time that I feel are worth sharing. First and foremost, if it hasn't been made clear up to this point, I've found that these two stack up surprisingly well against one another, as the S23 Ultra's significant battery life and camera improvements have leveled the playing field considerably here. Secondly, and arguably more importantly, the ecosystems they are a part of are also on a level playing field at this point, which may be surprising to some, but again, Samsung has made significant improvements to enhancing their ecosystem experience with products like their Galaxy Buds 2 Pro that automatically switch themselves to whatever device you are currently listening to media on and have great comfort, battery life, and noise canceling, just like the second generation AirPods Pro. And Samsung's latest Galaxy Book 3 Ultra provides not only powerhouse performance to match my 16-inch MacBook Pro, but also pairs very well with all of my Samsung devices in the same ways the MacBook Pro has with all of my Apple products. Both Apple and Samsung are currently sporting high-end smartwatches with multiple days of battery life, and overall for an average everyday user, you are getting very similar advantages and benefits regardless of which of these you may lean towards for your needs. And to bring it full circle, your choice of smartphone smartphone might be significantly influenced by what other products you are using in your life, and also influenced by what other people in your life are using, as the blue bubble syndrome is a very real thing here in the United States, at least, as my wife strongly prefers to see the blue bubble iMessage rather than standard green SMS text messages from my S23 Ultra. And I am also a part of several iMessage blue bubble group chats, and it sounds crazy, but many people out there will opt for an iPhone for reasons like this alone, whereas the S23 Ultra has more influence and leverage in the fact that it is the more versatile and exciting device to use on a day-to-day basis, with its massive and immersive display, S Pen stylus functionality, seamless multitasking capabilities, and more freedom to do literally whatever you set your mind to do with this phone, which can't always be said for my iPhone. The fact of the matter is that at the time of making this video, Samsung has been making significant strides towards pushing the boundaries of what a premium flagship smartphone can do from both a hardware and software perspective, while the iPhone, no matter how good its software is starting to lose some ground on the hardware side of things in key areas such as the severe lack of a proper zoom lens, which makes it difficult to choose as the phone that comes out on top in this matchup. While I normally like to make my videos as unbiased as possible and up to you, the viewer, to ultimately decide, I feel confident in this particular matchup to say that the S23 Ultra is the better overall smartphone here, pound for pound, and the ecosystem being built around it continues to improve more and more as time goes on. From a long-term user perspective of both of these phones and their ecosystems alike, the future is looking brighter and brighter for devices like the S23 Ultra, whereas the iPhone 14 Pro Max, while very commendable in its own regard, needs to find ways to continue innovating and keep up with the rest of the competition out there. But what are your thoughts on these two smartphones, and where do your preferences lie, and for what reasons? I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Shane Simons YouTube channel for more comparisons and reviews. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.